Welcome to part 6, in our tutorial series on how to develop a Contras-like game, with free visual game engine Gdevelop. In this video, we will fix some issues that were following us from previous videos, or at least try to solve them. We will implement enemy and player damage and death, and the scoring that goes with it when killing the enemy. Let's check what we have done in the previous videos. We can move, jump and fire. The enemy moves between waypoints, detects and fire at us. If we outrun it, it will go back to its patrolling. The camera is smoothly following the player and the temporary background that we have taken from a version of Contra's game. In game development, 80% of the production effort is done at the end of the game production, while trying to make it stable and bug-free. So it is very important to try to have a very clean and stable build of the game as we progress through development. So, first let's try to fix some of the bugs. The first one is that some of the bullet trails and muzzle flash from the player are not being spawned in the right place, which means that they are being created in the wrong layer. We need to go to the player fire section, in the events view, and make sure that the new effects created are correctly set into the appropriate layer. In our case game, let's try it. It seems to be working correctly. But we have another bug. When jumping off a platform, the enemy is falling through with us. This is because when we jump off the platform, we disable the its behavior, which will make all objects that have gravity to fall with us, if in the same platform. To fix this issue with a simple solution, the best way is to go to the object properties, then behaviors and set the gravity to 0. This way the enemy will not fall with us. We will have to perform this operation for all the objects with a gravity in the scene. Since now the character don't have a gravity anymore, we need to make sure that it stays in contact with the platform or the ground, as it will no longer fall. Let's check. And, yes, it is solved. The enemy is no longer falling off the platform with us. We have another problem with the fall of the player. When falling, the gun and the hand that holds it are never in touch with the arm, which makes it to appear as floating in front of the player. It seems that we have several problems associated with it. The first problem that we will have to check is if the origins of both the player and gun sprite are exactly in the same point. It seems that they are. Let's check the events. Well, we can see that when the player is jumping off the platform, we are only animating the player animation and not the gun. So copy the change animation action for the player, and paste it below. Then replace the player reference by the gun and change the animation number with the one that we are using for the jump while no firing. In our case, the animation number is 8. Run the game again. It seems that only part of the problem is fixed. And the hand with the gun is not yet fully matching the right position, although it is better than it was previously. It is possible also to see that the muzzle flash is still out of its place, which means that it is being rendered in the wrong layer. Let's go back to the events to the player fire event and check the action where the muzzle flash is being created. We can see that it is still being rendered on the game foreground, so change it to the game layer. For the hand and the gun attachment to the character, we need to check again the animations associated with it. Okay, there are a couple of animations that are not set to loop, one of them being the animation for the player when jumping and not firing. Let's check the loop option for both animations. By now, we have both the player and the enemy firing correctly bullets. Time to actually make some kills. For this, let's create a new group by clicking on the plus sign in the top bar, and then group from the dialog box. Type on the group to change the name, and name it Damage Enemy. Create a new sub-event inside the group by clicking on the Add Sub-Event button on the top bar. Click Add Condition and select the bullet object. For now we are going to use bullet to test the basic functionality, but later on we will have to make bullet player and bullet enemy. In the search box, type collision, and in the action list, select the collision action. In the object field select the physic enemy object. In the actions, select physic enemy and then in the search type delete and select the delete object. Repeat the process for the player sprite. Now, we need to actually make sure that the bullet object will be able to collide with the enemy. If you remember, when created our physic enemy object, we have just used a small box. That box has an height that is lower than the position from which the bullets are being fired, and which would cause the bullets to always miss the target. Select the physic enemy object and grab one of the small handles that you can see around it, and increase its height up to a point where the bullet's trajectory will be able to touch it. Run the game to test it, and when you fire the bullet, the enemy should disappear as soon as hit. And it works perfectly. But, it is somewhat dull, but we will deal with it in a while. If you have played Contra, when you kill an enemy, the game will give you at least 500 points to your score. So, let's add a score system to our game. In the object pane, click on the plus sign to create a new object. Select the text object, and then give it a descriptive name, in our case score. Select a font size and a color, which again in our case will be 100 for the font size and white for the color. Select the default text and replace it with 0. Click Apply to finish and close the window. Drag the score object from the object pane into the scene, and then change its layer to game foreground and finish fine-tuning its position in the screen. In our case in the top left corner. Now, go back to the Events tab, and add a new group by clicking on the plus button, and then Group. If created out of place, drag it to the right indentation. It should be at the same level than the other groups. Name it Score, or any other name you want. Then click on the Add Sub-Event button in the top bar to add a first event to this new group, that we will left blank for now. We need to make sure that we are actually tracking a score when enemies are killed. Go to the event where the enemy is destroyed, and at the end of the actions, and a new one. To keep the score at this stage we will use a scene variable, because it will be enough to keep track of a simple score. When later on in the series, when implementing a second player, we will have to readdress this decision, with either created a score associated with each player, or keep them in several scene or global variables. Type in the search box variable and from the list choose the option value of a scene variable. In the right pane, in the field variable, since we don't have yet any variable to hold the score, click on the blue button with an arrow point up. This will take us to the scene variable creation that is currently empty. Click on the Add variable to add a new variable named Score. Click Apply to close and go back to the action creation window. Now, click on the variable field and the score variable will be displayed to be selected. For the operator choose Add and for the value enter 1000. This means that every time we will an enemy, we will get 1000 points. We can later on adjust and balance everything to make sure it is consistent with all game rewards. Go back to the event that we created below the score group, to finish its creation. In this case, we don't want a condition, because we want it to be ran with every frame, so let's add directly a new action. Select the score text object and in the action list, choose Modify Text. In the right pane, under Modification sign, choose Set To, and in the Value field type variable string score. This will take the value of the scene variable string, convert it to string and save the result in the text field of the score UI object, and that will get it displayed in the screen. Click OK to close the action creation. Let's try to run the game and see if the scoring is working correctly. Yes, we have just won 1000 points, not bad for the current stage of development. Time to deal with some game juice and to have something more visual and more interesting. Go to the scene view, and then create a new object, by right-clicking on the game window, or by clicking on the plus sign in the object pane. Select the particles emitter object and then set the name to be enemy death particles, or any other name you prefer. Configure the different options for the particle system as you may like more, and if not, take our values as a reference. Click Apply to save and close, and you will have special effects for the damage function. Drag the particle system to the scene and press play to run the game and pre-visualize the effect. Cool. Go back to the events view and in the enemy damage event, add a new action. Select the enemy death particles from the list of objects, and then type Create on the search box to choose the Create Object action. In the right pane, for the X value, type physic enemy X, and for the Y value, type in physic enemy Y. There are not the best coordinates to make it appear, as it will be shown at the feats of the enemy. We are for now creating the building blocks that we will afterwards polish and fine-tune. Nonetheless, if you want to make it feel better, you could create an image point associated with the enemy sprite where to place the spawn of hurt or death particles. Time now for the player damage. Let's create a new group and name it Player Health. Create a new event. And for the condition, select the bullet. And for the method, collision. In the right pane, in the object field, choose the physic player from the drop-down options. Click OK to close and then click on Add Action. In the object list, choose physic player and then type in the search box variable. Gdevelop with shortlist the options and choose the modify a variable of an object. For the variable field, we don't have yet any variable where we are keeping the life of the player, so click on the blue button with the arrow pointing up, and then click on Add Variable. Name it Health, or any other name you like. And then press Apply to close the window. In the modification sign field, choose Subtract and in the value 1. Click OK to close. Scroll up to the beginning of the Events Manager, and in the Event on Scene Begin, add a new event. Select the physic player and then type in the search field variable, to display the actions associated to the object variables, and then select Modify a variable of an object. In the variable field select Health, in the modification sign, Set To, and in the value 0. This will cause our player character to be killed at the first hit from the enemy. Let's go down to the player health group and let's add a new condition, where we are going to check if the player health is smaller or equal to 0, then not only we will decrease the health, but we will add an action to actually delete the physic player and player sprite objects. Let's check if it works. It seems that we have a problem, because the enemy is not finding us. Let's go to the events and try to understand what is happening with the raycast. The problem seems to be related to the point from which the raycast is being fired. We have used the origins of the enemy, but now that we may have some changes, it seems that it is not intersecting the player. The best way to solve this problem is to actually use the same technique that we have used for firing the bullets, and by creating an image point higher in the sprite, from where the raycast will be fired. Go to the scene view and select the physic enemy by double-clicking on it, as to open the object properties. Click on the button Edit Points, and then on the plus sign to add a point. Name it raycast and move the point in the image to the place where you think could be suitable to have the raycast fired from. In our case, to point slightly higher than the center of the object. Click the Close button to save and exit the configuration. Let's go back to the Events view and then on the Raycast event. Change the origin of the raycast to point image X and point image Y associated with the new point. If we run again the game, we can see that now the enemy is again detecting us and firing at us. But we are not getting killed. But the enemy is. This is because we are still using the same bullet for both the player and the enemy, in which in the case of the enemy is getting him killed as soon as he fires its own bullet. We need to change it and have a different bullet for the player and for the enemies. In the scene view, select the bullet object, and then in the three dots or by right-clicking on it, choose the duplicate command. Rename the first bullet as bullet player and the new one just duplicated as bullet enemy. Now, in all the events where we are using the bullet object, we need to make sure they are using the correct bullet against the player or the enemy. Let's try it. We can see that we are not dying when the enemy is firing at us. This is because we have the same problem that we had earlier on with the enemy. Our physic player object, which can collide against the enemy bullets, is a small box and the bullets are passing over it without colliding. Go to the scene view and find the physic player. In our case, we are not able to find it as it is hidden behind the background, but as a reference for anyone who could have problems in finding instanced objects. Gdevelop as an interface to find objects in the current scene. In the top bar, select the Find Instance button. A new interface will open with all the objects currently on the scene. If you select it on the list, you can see that the bounding box appears, allowing you to select it and make any adjustment you could want. So, once you have found the physic player, increase its height as to be able to collide with the bullets. Let's test it. Let's count the hits. Okay. The player is not dying. Let's go back to the events. Well, we have an error. The conditions that we had set previously to detect the player death have disappeared. We may have deleted it by mistake, so, let's add them back. Add a new event, and for the condition, let's check that the variable health of the player physic is smaller than 0. If it is the case, then for the actions, let's delete the physic player and player sprite objects. Let's run again the game. Okay. You can see that at the first hit from the enemy we are dead, or at least half dead, as we can see that our hand and the gun are still there like some kind of ghost to haunt on us. So, in the events, let's delete the gun object too whenever deleting the other objects associated with the player. To make sure that we will make damage only once, let's add a trigger once condition to the events where the damage to enemy and player is performed. Let's run the game again. Well, we have been able to implement correctly the scoring, the enemy and player damage and death. We are a step closer to start implementing some of the funniest part of making a game, and have a first version of the combat system in place. But, for that we need also a first version of a spawn enemy system. To be able to make it, we will have to modularize the enemies as to be able to spawn them randomly in the levels, and have them performing correctly their behaviors. We hope that you have liked this video. If it has been the case, consider subscribing, giving a like and clicking on the notification button. If you have any question, problem or comment, don't hesitate in putting a comment and we will answer as fast as we could. See you in the next video, game developers.